Hey guys, it's Cass. Thanks for tuning in. If you've spent any amount of time watching this channel, you will know that I absolutely love essay collections. And if you're new here, hi, my name's Cass. I absolutely love essay collections. They're one of my most read genres of books, and I like to think that I've read a decent amount of them. Today I have 20 different essay collections to talk about with you guys and recommend to you. I've split them up into a couple different categories. We have essay collections about reading and writing, essay memoir hybrids, essay collections about pop culture, some new releases, my all-time favorites, and some honorable mentions. I'm gonna try to keep this as short as I can while still hopefully telling you enough about these books to get you interested in them. I know that essays can be kind of an overwhelming genre to get into. I feel like there's a lot of different types of them and lots of different topics, and sometimes you just don't know where to start. So hopefully this gives you guys some good jumping off points, and if you enjoy this video, feel free to hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, let me know what your favorite essay collections are, or if you have anything that you're looking for in particular that you want to see if I have any recommendations about. Let me know. I love chatting with you guys. And yeah, we're gonna get right into it. So the first category is essay collections about reading and writing. And the first book that I'd like to recommend is A Horse at Night on Writing by Amina Cain. I read my copy of this from the library, so I don't have the book with me, but this is definitely a book that I would purchase a physical copy of so that I could revisit. This book made my TBR list grow exponentially longer. I genuinely have a note in my phone that has a list of every single book that Amina Cain mentions in A Horse at Night, and I am slowly making my way and checking all of the boxes on them. I believe that this is the book that introduced me to Marie Ndiaye, who is becoming one of my favorite authors the more that I read of her, so I'm really grateful for that. But this book is basically just a love letter to the books that Amina Cain loves. She talks a lot about the craft of writing and just explore some ideas that pop up in the books that she's loved. And I think what really makes this unique is that Amina Cain's collection and her kind of canon of books that she's talking about is really unique in and of itself. You have some classics and some really popular authors like Virginia Woolf and Elena Ferrante and Annie Ernaux that she talks about, but there's also just so many others that I personally had never heard of, and I feel like they don't pop up a lot in books like these. From what I remember, the essays in here are a bit shorter and more fragmentary than some of your more standard essay collections, but I think that it really works with Amina Cain's writing style. She has a very sparse and like precise way of writing, and I think that it really lends itself to that shorter style. And yeah, I would really just say that this is like the quintessential book for anybody that loves whenever writers talk about writing and reading, because it's just obvious the love and the respect that Amina Cain has for the works that she talks about in A Horse at Night. Next, we have Bodywork, The Radical Power of Personal Narrative by Melissa Febos. I would say that this is a book that focuses in a little bit more on the process and the craft of writing than of reading. It's a pretty slim collection that really focuses on creating memoir and talking about some different aspects of personal writing that tend to pop up whenever writers are doing a memoir. She talks a lot about certain scenarios that are often looked down upon and called kind of like navel-gazy and frivolous, and she looks at how to incorporate those into your writing, and she's really just trying to remove some of the shame of talking about the things that happen to us with this book. I think if you're an aspiring writer, this would be really insightful to pick up. I am not a writer personally, but it's one of those books that like made me want to pick up a pencil and a piece of paper and start writing something. The last book that I have in the reading and writing section is In the Margins on the Pleasures of Reading and Writing by our queen, Elena Ferrante. This wasn't an all-time favorite for me, but I still wanted to include it in this video because you might like it for the reasons that I maybe struggled with it a bit more. This one definitely felt a bit more dense and just one that you really had to work at a little bit more to understand. I'm not sure if that's just the nature of the content or maybe if it was something with the translation from Italian with this book. I think the first half of this really worked for me. I struggled a bit more with the second half of it for whatever reason. I think she got a little bit more esoteric in the second half and a lot of it ended up going over my head. I will say this was my first Ferrante that I ever read, so that could have been part of the issue. And I also feel like I was just kind of earlier on in my experience of reading about writing and reading essay collections. So I think if I revisited this now, having read more books and just having a deeper understanding of some of the themes that she's talking about in here, I think that it would probably be a lot more enjoyable for me. So I would recommend this if you've enjoyed some of Elena Ferrante's work in the past, if you've enjoyed kind of literary criticism and writing about writing in the past. I wouldn't recommend this as kind of a starting point, but I think maybe if you read the first two books in this section and enjoyed those, this would be a good next step. The next category that I wanted to talk about are kind of essay memoir hybrids. I would say that memoirs are also one of my most read kind of categories or genres of books. I think it goes like literary fiction at the top, memoirs, and then essay collections. And I just find that I really love books with more of that personal bent to them. And the first book that I wanted to talk about in this category is Make It Scream, Make It Burn by Leslie Jamison. This isn't a completely personal piece of work. It definitely kind of leans into that hybrid part of the name of this category. She talks about a lot of different really interesting subjects in this. One that is particularly standing out to me in my memory is about blue whales. I think it was like one specific blue whale in particular that there was a study on or something like that. It's been a little while since I've read this one and I don't have a copy of it because this was another library read for me. But there are some more personal pieces at the end of this book where she is talking about the ending of a relationship that she was in, and I posted so many quotes from this book to my Goodreads account. It was honestly kind of embarrassing. Like it was far too many quotes in the update feed, but I thought that her work was really relatable, and now that I've read Splinters, which is her actual memoir, I can definitely see kind of the seeds of Splinters being planted in this book. I would say if you're someone that likes to yearn and long and obsess over things, this is definitely the book for you, because even whenever she's not talking about the personal and she's exploring different subjects, they all do center around those kinds of themes. The next essay memoir hybrid that I want to talk about is The Crane Wife by C.J. Hauser, and the subtitle of this is literally a memoir and essays, so that combination is obviously just like catnip to me, so I knew that I had to pick this one up. This one really deep dives into love and coming to terms with relationships ending, looks at queerness a little bit as well, and really I think in this book C.J. Hauser is really just asking the question of how do we know when we're living the life that we're supposed to be living, and how do we kind of come to terms with ourselves and know truly who we are. And yeah, we follow her kind of from the end of this relationship that she was in through the aftermath of it. And there's a quote in here that I have dog-eared that I wanted to share because I feel like it gives you a good taste of some of the themes in the book. So she says, "But I find other people contagious. I am porous to the world, a kind of joyful sponge for the affectations and interests of the people I love. It has been the work of my life to build slightly firmer boundaries around myself so that I can figure out where I end and the people I love begin. And I feel like that's almost just like a thesis statement for this book. So yeah. My final essay memoir hybrid is The Leaving Season by Kelly McMasters. This was another library read, so I don't have it with me, but I do believe that I talked about this in my November wrap up. I think it was one of like my first videos that I made. And I believe that the subtitle of that is also like a memoir and essays, so it fits right along with The Crane Wife. This book is a bit more chronological and linear than the other collections that I've recommended so far. McMasters takes us through the beginning of her relationship with an artist in New York. They get married, they have kids, they deal with illness, they move to rural Pennsylvania. Kelly ends up opening a little bookstore in the town that they moved to, and eventually the relationship does come to an end, and we see Kelly kind of grappling with being a single mom and just trying to find her footing with that. I feel like this did have like a nice narrative arc. One thing that I would have loved to hear more about though was her experience owning her bookstore. That was one of the things that really drew me in about this book whenever I heard Renee from The Left-Handed Reader talking about it, but I just wish that there was a little bit more to it. But yeah, if you're looking for something that you can kind of follow the line throughout time, I think that this would be a really good one for you. Maybe if you're into novels and memoirs and stuff like that, but you haven't really dipped your toe into essays, I think this would be a good starting point. The next category is essay collections about pop culture, and the first book that I have for this is Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino. I believe that this was a 5-star read for me whenever I read it last year. Gia is looking at reality TV, religion, literature, drugs. She kind of touches upon it all in this book. I really don't know what else you could ask for. This is a great work of cultural criticism. She takes down a lot of different ideas that have been perpetuated in society, like the idea of the perfect woman. She tackles rape culture in this as well, and just really has kind of a feminist view of pop culture. One of the other underlying themes in this is this idea of self-delusion. The subtitle for this is Reflections on Self-Delusion, and she really does a great job of unpacking the ways that we are constantly deluding ourselves. There's so much, I think, with like reality TV and the internet and different cultural things like that that really kind of blows people's ideas of themselves out of proportion, because there's just so much focus on like the individual and like the personality. So I really enjoyed this one and highly recommend it. Was I holding that upside down? I might have been holding that upside down this entire time, I don't know. Next in the pop culture category, we have Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. Shout out to Jalen from The Bar and the Bookcase and the Reading the Room podcast for being the first person to really turn me on to this book. If you have ever been a fan of an artist that has been canceled and you weren't sure what to do about it, this is the book for you. Claire gets it. She's tackling this idea of separating the art from the artist and whether that's even something that is possible to do. Art can be so personal sometimes, and it can be so linked to the people that make it that it's like, can you really extract someone that's done something terrible from the work that they've made? I don't know, and I don't think that Claire really knows either, but it is very interesting to hear her musings on it. She dives into the works of Ernest Hemingway, Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, Pablo Picasso, and kind of looks at the things they had done in their lives and how that influenced their art, and like, is it okay to like those things still? I don't know, maybe. I think it's different for everyone, and yeah, this book doesn't have all of the answers to the questions that it's asking, but I think that it is helpful in kind of shaping the conversation around it and just making you think a little bit deeper about those issues. I also believe that Monsters just came out in paperback recently, if I am remembering Instagram posts that I've seen correctly. My final pop culture essay collection recommendation is Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. I also talked a lot about this in another one of my really early videos. I did a 24-hour reading challenge, and this was one of the books that I read. I feel like this is Joan's most iconic essay collection, and I think it's a really good kind of stepping stone, introductory, like overview of essay collections in general. It's kind of like, to me, is one of the blueprints. The thing that I really enjoyed the most about this collection is the way that Didion invokes a sense of time and place. She is the absolute queen of talking about California in the 60s, and a lot of the pieces in here have to do with that. There are some more personal ones in certain sections, which I really loved just based on my personal taste. She looks at different movie stars in here. She looks at different criminal trials. She looks at counterculture. And yeah, I think it's just a really solid work all around. Next up, we're going to talk about some new releases in the essay world. And I'm going to start with a controversial one, which is No Judgment by Lauren Oyler. This just came out in March from Harper One, and it's gotten a couple think pieces written about it. I'm not going to go into all that. I don't really have an opinion on it, but I'm going to include it in this video because I really enjoyed my experience reading it. There's a bunch of different topics covered in this book. She looks at gossip, Goodreads, her time living in Berlin, autofiction, being vulnerable, and dealing with like anxiety and mental illness are kind of the main themes of each of the essays in this book. I thought that it was a really good mix of both personal and like more researched writing. I think all of the anecdotes that she pulled from her own life, as well as all of the like quotes that she pulled in from other works, I think that they all really fit in and contributed to what she was trying to say. This also made me interested in doing a lot of like further reading. She talks about a couple of really interesting like articles and like standalone like online published essays that I have bookmarked to revisit, and I don't always like do that with books that are super referential. I'm not always super interested in visiting the source material, but she had me pulled in with some of the topics in here. I also thought that this book was funny. Some people might not agree with that, but to me, she has like a very like self-deprecating kind of like millennial sense of humor, and I chuckled throughout. New release number 2 that I would like to talk about is Any Person is the Only Self by Elisa Gabbert. This publishes on June 11th from FSG, and thank you so much to them and to Harper One for providing me galleys of both of these books on NetGalley. I thought that this was an enjoyable collection. I kind of breezed through it before bed each night, and it was like a nice little companion for me right before I fell asleep. It wasn't anything super groundbreaking to me, but if you love whenever writers talk about reading and writing, I think that this fits into that first category that I talked about, and I think that you would enjoy this as well. For me, the issue that I had with it, and it's not one that I've seen really anyone else bring up, so it might just be a me thing, so take this with a grain of salt, but I'm gonna draw a comparison here. I feel like Lauren Oyler did a really good job of incorporating the quotes that she pulled from other people and other works kind of into her own writing and her own opinions, if that makes sense. And with Any Person is the Only Self, the thing that I kind of got snagged on sometimes was that it almost felt like there were just so many quotes from other books and other people just like back to back to back, and I felt at times like Elisa got kind of overshadowed and just like lost in her bibliography, which on one hand, that's lovely because it's so obvious the passion and the love that she has for the books that she's talking about in this. But at the same time, I did want a little bit more of her own opinion and personality to shine through, if that makes sense. But it was a really pleasant, like sweet exploration into the mind of someone that loves to read. So I can always appreciate that and relate to it. So I would still definitely recommend this if that's the kind of thing that you're into. And then I have two new releases that I have not read yet, but I did just want to kind of mention because they're from two of my favorite authors. The first one is There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abdurraqib. This was published by Random House at the end of March, and I am going to be shopping for Indie Bookstore Day this weekend, and I think I'm going to see if I can get my hands on a copy of this because I think that Hanif Abdurraqib can do no wrong. We will talk a little bit more about that later on in the video. This is talking about basketball, which is not really my thing, but I think that he's going to do a wonderful job with writing about sports. One of his really strong suits, I think, is making you care about the things that he's writing about, even if you don't have a personal connection or like a stake in it. I think that he just has such a way of hooking you in and making you care. So hopefully I can get my hands on a copy of this. We also have The Position of Spoons by Deborah Levy. This publishes on October 1st from FSG, and I do have a digital galley of this on NetGalley, so I'm really excited to get to read it eventually. I think I want to read at least one more of her previously published books before I get to this one. If you have watched like any of my videos on here, you'll know that Deborah Levy is becoming, or she is, one of my favorite authors at this point. She's someone else that I feel like can do no wrong, even with books that I felt maybe not as invested in. She always turns it around. She always finds a way. So I feel confident in this one. And also CJ from cjreads said in her review of this on Goodreads that this is like if Deborah Levy had a Twitter account, which I think is hilarious, and like, say less, I'm in. So yeah, keep an eye out for this one. I will be talking about it more in depth once I do read it. All right, next category is an important one. These are my all-time favorites. I read all three of these last year, and I feel like they are just like these cornerstones in my personal library and my taste, and I am very excited to talk about them. First up, we have Too Much and Not the Mood by Durga Bose. This book, oh my gosh. I am pretty sure that I used up an entire pencil underlining quotes in this book. Like, I don't know if you can see, like there's a lot of underlines in here. I actually initially read this digitally on Scribd, and I highlighted a bunch of things on my e-reader, and then once I got this copy of this book, I went back through and looked at all of the highlights that I made on my e-reader and like transferred them into underline in here, which is not something that I have done very often. This book really focuses on just like the little things in life is the best way that I can think to sum it up. I think Durga really shines when she's just describing these like little intimate details of everyday life and everyday people. She looks at the way that different people and places and things interact and just like the nuances, and it is just such a comfort read to me, I would say. This is one of those books that I keep saying that I'm going to reread, so maybe soon we'll do that, but no promises. I'm notorious for not rereading things, but she looks at romantic relationships, familial relationships, platonic relationships. She covers the whole spectrum of relationships. She looks at her Indian heritage and her childhood in Canada and the ways that she kind of felt othered growing up. She is also bringing in a bunch of references to literature and art and even sports. I think that she talks a lot about basketball in one of the pieces in here, which, once again, not really my thing, but I think she's also just really skilled in making you see the beauty and like the connections to the other things that she's talking about. And I think my favorite essay in here is called Since Living Alone. It really resonated for me because I moved out into my own space last year. And I have a quote from that piece. She says, "I count living alone as, in a manner of speaking, finding interest in my own story, of prospering, of creating a space where I repeat the same actions every day, wetting them, rearranging them, starting from scratch but with variables I can control, or conversely, eagerly appeal to their chaos." And she just, I related to so much in that piece. Yeah, I just love this book. I think everyone should read it. Then we have A Life of One's Own, 9 Women Writers Begin Again by Joanna Biggs. This was my #1 favorite nonfiction book of 2023. This, like, honestly has become like a Bible to me and just is truly one of those books that I feel like is at the basis of my taste in books. This is kind of a mishmash of the like reading and writing and the memoir hybrid categories that I talked about earlier. Joanna is looking at her own life and the divorce that she went through and the way that she kind of rebuilt her life after that divorce. And at the same time, she's looking at the works of 9 different authors. She talks about Mary Wollstonecraft, George Eliot, Zora Neale Hurston, Virginia Woolf, Simone de Beauvoir, Sylvia Plath, Toni Morrison, and Elena Ferrante. And I have read 6 out of those 9 authors. So this was just like a no-brainer to me. Like, of course I'm going to be obsessed with this. The only writers that I haven't read that she talked about in here were Mary Wollstonecraft, George Eliot, and Zora Neale Hurston, which ironically are the first 3 essays in this book. But even though I wasn't familiar with any of their work particularly, she still hooked me in and made me want to keep reading. She's diving into themes of marriage, motherhood, domesticity, and balancing all of those things with writing and just really like showing up as your best self and doing the work that is really important to you in your life. We see Joanna and all of the authors that she talks about in here kind of carving their own paths and finding freedom and just like making, as the title says, a life of their own, which shout out to the Virginia Woolf nod of this title. I love that, and also this cover is beautiful. I have a quote from this one too. I don't remember what essay this comes from, but she says, "It wasn't that I didn't know how to make a life, I discovered. It just wasn't easy. I had to be patient and I had to try new things and have them fail sometimes. I had to work out what was right for me." And once again, like, that's just, it's I think such a good encapsulation of what this book is about. And then my last all-timer is They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Abdurraqib. I also have a reading vlog from pretty early on that is pretty much just me reading this book and gushing over how much I love it. So if you're intrigued, definitely go check that out. But this is just the king of the pop culture category, I would say. Just incredible music writing and cultural criticism. Like I kind of alluded to when I was talking about There's Always This Year, he does such a great job of making you care about things that you have no connection to otherwise. He covers such a wide range of artists in here, many of which I don't listen to in my personal life, and I was invested and intrigued by all of the artists that he talked about. This really came alive for me in, I think it's the second section of the book. I think referred to it as like the emo section because that is my favorite genre of music. He talks about Fall Out Boy, The Wonder Years, My Chemical Romance, and he just really spoke to my heart with those pieces, especially the Fall Out Boy one. Like, if you've ever spoken to me, you'll know that they're my favorite band, and I just saw them last month, and his essay Fall Out Boy Forever in here, like me and my friend Claire were talking before the concert started, we were like, I wish that we had a copy of this book here so that we could do like a dramatic reading of Fall Out Boy Forever. If that's your kind of thing, highly recommend this. Hanif is a poet, and I feel like people talk about this a lot, like poets writing prose is always just so good. He has such a beautiful writing style and he uses language in such an incredible way, but he does it in a way that isn't inaccessible or unapproachable. I think he's really just looking to highlight the connections between people and the way that music facilitates that. And yeah, this is great. It has a blurb on the back from Lucy Dacus. So, I mean, just, you have to read it. You just have to. Finally, we have some honorable mentions. These books are either duplicates of an author that I already talked about, or maybe just like have some caveats or just like weren't 100% my favorite. But like I mentioned, one of the things that I talk about in here that might have been something that I struggled with might be a reason why you would love this book. So I still want to talk about them. The first one is Coventry by Rachel Cusk. Rachel Cusk is, I believe, the author that I've read the most in my literary life thus far, and I'm still making my way through her catalog, but I absolutely love her. And I think that this book, Coventry, it's an interesting one. I feel like it is a really good, like, all-encompassing sampler of the themes that she explores in her nonfiction books, but I feel like her other nonfiction is just so much stronger, like Aftermath, which is talking about her divorce, A Life's Work, which is talking about motherhood. They just really feel stronger to me and more worth your time. So I kind of am stuck about recommending this because she is one of my favorite writers, and I could see this being like a decent way to test out her writing, but I can also see it not being like super impressive to you if you're not like a Rachel Cusk freak like I am. So I don't know, I would say maybe try out the other books that I mentioned by her first and then kind of come back to this if you enjoy those. But I do want to shout out Rachel Cusk because I love her. My next honorable mention is Thin Places, Essays from In Between by Jordan Kisner. In this book, she's kind of exploring this idea of thin places being this place or situation where the boundaries between like the self and the outer world kind of dissolve. Things are kind of blurry and porous, and I thought that that was a really interesting topic to explore. But one of the things, just for my tastes personally as a reader, this talks a lot about like religion and spirituality, which is interesting, but not really something that I personally have a stake in. But if you really enjoy reading about those topics, I would highly recommend this. And also Jordan Kisner, I don't know if the podcast is still a thing or not, but she was the host of a podcast called Thresholds that was her in conversation with a lot of really great authors. So that's actually how I found out about this book, and I would highly recommend checking that out to see if any of the episodes pique your interest. Wanted to give also a shout out to The Empathy Exams by Leslie Jamison. I didn't like this one as much as Make It Scream, Make It Burn, so that's why I put it in the honorable mention section. She talks a lot about like empathy and pain and how that manifests in different situations, and I thought that that was intriguing. From what I can remember, this was also a library read, so I don't have it to like look back at and kind of flesh out my thoughts anymore, but I don't think that this was as personal as Make It Scream, Make It Burn, and I think that that's kind of where it lost points for me. Finally, we have The White Album by Joan Didion. I love Joan, but I was not fully in my essay era whenever I read this at the beginning of 2023, and so I feel like I just didn't appreciate this one enough. I feel like Slouching Towards Bethlehem objectively is the stronger work, but yeah, I think this one was just kind of like user error. as far as like I was too new to the genre and hadn't really found my footing yet, so I didn't really get the hype around this one. All right, that is gonna be it from me today. I hope that this was helpful if you're new to essays, or even if you're an essay lover like me and you're just trying to find some different recommendations. I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what your top favorite essay collection is, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.